You know, we accomplish a lot more when we work together as a community. The same thing goes for the natural world. When plants collaborate with their environment and each other, diverse wildlife comes along to enrich our lives with beauty and discovery. Today, Hannah Armstrong from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center prompts that congenial collaboration in our gardens. Hello, Hannah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You are an accomplished gardener, and you obviously have a wonderful background in working with native plants, native plant communities. But we wanted today to specifically talk about communities. I know there's been a lot of focus on native plants, but if we just look at a native plant, sort of have it in a bell jar, where the Victorians did, we're really not doing that plant justice, because these plants, after all, came from communities, correct?
Exactly. I think it's a really interesting topic because a lot of times we'll just plant what we think looks good in a bed, leave a lot of space, do a lot of mulching, maybe even just a bed of annuals, and not really think about how those plants work together and create a whole ecosystem. And I think it's a really important thing to consider, because when we plant in communities, the plantings are much more resilient and biodiverse, which supports a whole host of pollinators and wildlife.
And again, when we think about communities, we're really talking about plants that evolve together and then co-evolve with pollinators and other species, correct?
Exactly. So I think one of the best things we can do for wildlife and for pollinators specifically is planting native plants. So even if you're not sure of what exactly those specialized relationships are between a plant and a pollinator, knowing that native plants have evolved in the same place that the pollinators have, it's a really good likelihood that they've got a symbiosis going on.
Let's just back up a little bit and talk about, if you had to define what even a plant community is. If we're talking about, some garden noobs, so to speak, that are just starting out, how would you define what a plant community is? Is it just throwing a bunch of stuff together?
My favorite way to think about plant communities is in layers. So it's a fully planted ecosystem. It's a group of plants that all work together to occupy different ecological niches. So thinking about layers above ground, below ground, in space, and in time. Say you have a large tree, for example. That's going to take full sun. It's going to use up a lot of space. It's going to grow really tall. But what grows underneath it? So planting understory shrubs and having that area occupied. And then ground cover is really important as well. And those take different layers above ground, but their roots also make different use of space below ground. So you've got deep tap roots, you've got shallow fibrous roots, and all of those roots serve to lock the soil in place and to make use of all the available nutrients. And so it's a much more stable community. It's much more resilient. Another aspect to think about is time. So when you plant a large tree, or you have a large tree, is that tree going to grow? Is it going to make more shade over time? Or is the canopy going to be bare during parts of the year and create more sunlight that filters down? And seasonality. Is something blooming at most times of the year? What does it look like throughout the seasons?
Sure. And there was a really interesting article just that came out in the New York Times a couple of days ago, talking about, the biggest trees aren't always the best. And why I was excited to talk to you today about this is because that goes on to really talk about the understory trees, which are sort of this unsung hero, right? And we always think about plant a big oak or something, which are wonderful, love trees. But, even taking that and going further, I think we're talking about now is there's this herbaceous component. There's all these other layers, like you were just talking about, that really are critical to landscape performance. So while planting a tree is doing one thing, planting an ecosystem, if we had that Drake meme, we'd be saying, yes, that's what we're looking at. Let's get into the details. What about something like American beautyberry?
Well, American beautyberry is a fantastic option to plant if you do have a large oak tree in your yard. It does really well in that dappled shade. It's fantastic for birds. They love the berries. The berries are edible for people as well, so you can make jellies and jams. And the leaves, they have this fragrance that's really particular to this plant that is a mosquito repellent. So it's not perfect, but it's something.
Right. We'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take it, whatever we can get. And then underneath that, planting a whole variety of ground covers. So it's nice to pick one or two types of understory shrubs from a design standpoint.
Mhm.
But then you really want that biodiversity to support a whole host of wildlife and pollinators. And the ground cover is a really fantastic place to do that. So planting things like white avens, cedar sage, tropical sage, you've got a lot of options. Heartleaf skullcap, golden groundsel is another lovely one,
Mhm.
and really going to town with the biodiversity in the ground covers.
But think about the time. I do know that with the golden groundsel and the skullcap, which are wonderful, they are sort of ephemeral. They sort of come and go. You know, when the either it's, you know, golden groundsel is one of our first guys to pop up in the spring, so it's so lovely and wonderful. And then you see that heartleaf skullcap coming up, and then it kind of comes and goes. So we might want to think about potentially some anchor plants, maybe like some of the grasses. You know, a lot of people, you know, grass idea is really not easy when you're starting out. You kind of got to get in there and get beat up and not know what you're doing a little bit, but you might need some of those anchor plants. So what about some of the grasses that you think would be great to help anchor this layer?
Absolutely. It's really wonderful to start your plant community design with a strong base of perennials. So, and then sprinkling in those ephemerals and annuals, as well as just added pops of color for pollinators and nectar sources. So Texas sedge is a really fantastic one for shade, and it does well in a variety of soil types. Cherokee sedge is another one, but there are plenty of sedges for every type of soil that you've got available. And I'd highly encourage people to check the database on our website, where you can plug in your soil conditions, your light conditions, your water, and see what pops up.
And then I know with the sedges is something that, again, if grasses are somewhat scary to newcomers, then sedges are even more nefarious. And they can be a little bit harder to locate, but they are key. And I know in our prairie restorations, the graminoids really need to make up, you know, you have your grasses and your sedges. Those sedges sometimes should account for up to 50% of that community. So sedges are really key, and they're really drought tolerant. They do pretty well. There's some that like more moisture, but there's some of them that just really can just go without water for a long period of time and hold that nice evergreen texture to your garden as it's moving through the seasons as well.
Without having to mow as well, which is another perk.
Yes.
Straggler daisy is another good option that people probably already have in their yards. It's
Right.
a nice one that blooms. Not everyone loves it, but it's an unsung pollinator plant. So
Some people hate it because it's really, it can be aggressive and then it goes away. So if you were going to plant some horse herb, what might be some good competitor plants to kind of keep that species at bay?
well, I think starting with like a specific area that you want to keep it in is one way to handle that, or just having it sprinkled through a planting that is more robust. So sprinkling it through your sedges or sprinkling it through your grasses is one way to handle that.
And then there's some larger grasses like big muhly or Gulf muhly if you want some color, and of course little blue stem, Indian grass, which are wonderful performers and give you those colors. Again, you know, being in Central Texas, a lot of our color comes in the spring with the wildflowers, of course. And then we kind of go a little muted in our falls. We don't have the beautiful northeastern falls of the temperate forest, but these grasses actually offer us a really nice late season color and texture as well.
Absolutely. I think they're really striking. I love to see them in sunny small yards. Like, I think they're a really beautiful feature that can be very striking. And they do have bare patches of soil sort of between the bunch grasses. And that's a great place to plug in your annual wildflowers. So things like bluebonnet, firewheel, paintbrush, Texas star, those are all good options to intersperse. And I'd like to point out, it's great to let those go to seed fully before you pull them. That way you've got next year's crop planted. It'll be a nice surprise where they pop up, and a good mixture.
And then with wildflowers, I do know that if you do restoration projects or you're doing some of this garden, you know, data shows that diversity is lost over time because it doesn't have connectivities to larger populations. So if you are going to be doing the wildflowers, it is good to, you know, every couple of years go back and scratch and throw a little bit more seed in there just to make sure you have the site reseeding itself. But you know, we can always, you know, we don't want to create something and then do nothing, because that's actually a form of management. So we've still got to be in there. And I always like to say you get to be the buffalo and getting there and root around. I do want to mention, we've got a lot of different soils here in Central Texas. When you're approaching a site, what are you looking at? Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to Home Depot, I'm going to get super rich, acidic, peat dominated soils that has, tons of nutrients in there. Is that what we need to be looking to do?
No, I think it's contrary to a lot of permaculture gardening and organic gardening. You think amend your soil with as much compost as possible and get it as rich as possible, but that's actually not what we want to do for native plants. Native plants are wonderfully adapted to the soils that we have here in Texas, which are challenging soils to work with. If you're pulling non-native plants, we can have some really clay soils all the way down to like very sandy, dry soils. So I would say the thing to do is to pick plants that are adapted to the soil conditions you already have, rather than spending a lot of time, money, and effort trying to amend your soil to make it something it's not. Where wildflowers are a great example. Like bluebonnets will rot in soil that's too rich. They want to be in that rocky, rough cracks in soil that you wouldn't expect them to grow in. So I think taking the soil that you have and working with it is the best thing to do.
And then a great resource, the Wildflower Center has the Native Plants of North America database that anybody can go for free. Wonderful resource. And if you want to start looking at those species, it'll sort of tell you with some of them, what sort of soils it likes. Does it need, it does well in clay soils, needs a little bit more drainage like bluebonnets or something like that. So that's a great resource as well. And before we sign out, we've got a big plant sale coming up right on 9/24 through November the 7th. And I believe it's from 9 to 11 members can come to the native plant sale. And then from 11 to 1, it's open to the general public. And any favorite plants there that y'all are going to be selling this year?
Absolutely. Beautyberry is there right
Great.
now. We've got quite a few, and it's going to change from week to week. So I would highly encourage people to check the website. We've got a plant availability list up there, so you can see exactly what we'll have the day of, which would be a good option. And reservations are encouraged, but not required.
Okay, great. And then also I wanted to send a shout out to folks that I'll be teaching an introduction to pocket prairies on October 10th from 10 to 12. And you'll get to talk even more about plant communities and really learn about if you want to really go wild and, let's be honest, help save the world, then install a pocket prairie in your yard. Come learn with me. Come meet Hannah. Thank you so much, Hannah. Has really enjoyed this. It's been very fun speaking with you today.
Thank you for having me.